One of the main reasons why I love making these Game Over episodes is because it gives me an excuse to really dig into the stories and lore of classic game franchises. I mean, I'll often go into a series thinking that it's going to be relatively simple, only to find a deep and fascinating story full of surprises. That's certainly true when it comes to the Gradius series, which originally debuted in the arcades back in 1985 and has since gone on to spawn more than a dozen sequels and spin-offs. Over the course of 2 episodes, we're going to be exploring every inch of the Gradius timeline in an effort to fully understand the Bacterian Wars. Turn back now if you don't want to know what happens next, because today we're going to spoil the stories and endings for the mainline Gradius series. This is Game Over, the early years. Alright, in case you're wondering what Gradius is and the Gradius game franchise, then let me just say right at the start that it's a planet. Gradius is described in the 1985 original as a peaceful Earth-like world that is now under all-out space attack from their old nemesis, a race of beings from the subspace star cluster of Bacterian. But don't worry, because the gentle people of Gradius have a foolproof plan. They've created a prototype hyperspace fighter ship known by its iconic name, the Warp Rattler? Hang on, wait a second. Isn't Vic Viper the star of this series? As it turns out, when Konami brought Gradius to the Nintendo Entertainment System, they changed the ship's name from Vic Viper to Warp Rattler, which I think we can all agree was a terrible decision. Thankfully, this alternate name didn't stick, so from now on, I'm just gonna use the name Vic Viper. But look, no matter what you call the ship, the main mission remains the same. 17-year-old James Burton will need to steal the enemy capsules and boost Vic Viper's hyper powers in an effort to infiltrate Zaerus, the Bacterian super fortress. It's here where we find the brain of the complex biocomputer and shoot it until it explodes. Here is how the Nintendo Entertainment System port concludes. While the Vic Viper was able to successfully destroy the complex biocomputer in the first game, the Bacterian Empire is back for revenge in the 1988 sequel. This time around, they're being controlled by Gofer, a new leader that supposedly has a giant head. And I don't mean that in a metaphorical sense, I mean that he literally has a giant head. Also, this is the entirety of the story, so let's just go ahead and cut straight to the ending. Having just weathered not one, but two onslaughts by the Bacterian Empire, the United Gradius World Forces were created to defend against future conflicts. This proves to be a smart decision because the Bacterians' dark forces believe that they possess an unstoppable power that'll plunge the entire universe into total war and will lead to complete annihilation. Early on, it seems like this plan might actually work, as the dark forces had no trouble at all smashing the defenses of the surrounding planets, sending the good people of Gradius into quite a panic. To counter the oncoming threat, the United Gradius World Forces uses half of their fighter crafts as a defensive net, while the other half is used as a strike team. Unfortunately, they're badly outnumbered, and the Dark Forces easily rip through the front lines. It's an absolute bloodbath. Sensing that it's their only choice, the United Gradius World Forces sends out the Vic Viper for one more mission. The goal is to locate the aliens' big brain leader and blow it up once and for all. Here's what happens after the good guys win. You'll be happy to know that the Third Bacterian War actually led to peace, freeing the gentle people of Gradius from the terror of the Dark Forces. And it wasn't even just a short ceasefire either, because things remained peaceful for several hundred years, allowing the planet to rebuild their civilization to new heights of prosperity. But maybe things aren't as peaceful as they appear. After an exploration vessel goes missing in the Black Nebula region, many fear that a new enemy is quietly planning another strike. As it turns out, they have a good reason to be afraid, because neighboring planets and colonies all begin to fall prey to the new mysterious force. What's more, centuries of peace have made the Gradius military woefully unprepared for this new threat. They're once again forced to rely on prototype fighters, including the brand new Jade Knight and Falchion Beta, in order to fly to the center of the Black Nebula and save Gradius. And what exactly do they find there? Well, it's a whole bunch of classic Bacterian bosses, of course. What else would it be? We successfully fight back, and this is what happens next. You know all that stuff that I just said about Gradius, Gaiden? Well, it also applies to Gradius 4, which was released in 1999 in arcades and then later ported to the PlayStation 2. This sequel takes place centuries after the Great Bacterian Wars, at a time when those battles were just nothing but a distant memory. Gradius has taken the time to rebuild the planet and restore peace and prosperity. However, just like the last game, they're attacked by a massive army that quickly overpowers the Gradius defense force and threatens the planet. Now it's up to a lone fighter to use a prototype ship to defeat the aliens one more time. Gradius 4 ultimately ends with our hero running into a familiar face, Gofer and his giant head. I want you to listen carefully to what he says in this ending because it's gonna come up again in future games.
My body will be broken into pieces and spread across the universe. But with every piece, I will be reborn. Then you will regret that you destroyed me. Ha 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 ha!
After years of spinning its wheels, we finally start to see some real progress to the story in Gradius Galaxies on the Game Boy Advance. After a meteorite crashes on Ramillies, the fifth planet in the peaceful Gradius system, we learn more about what happened to the Bacterian Empire. You see, when the Vic Viper heroically destroyed the fortress 400 years ago, the planet was blown up into countless fragments that drifted in space for centuries. What we didn't know at the time is that these fragments were embedded with a self-breeding DNA program of the enemy's biological weapon. So when one of these meteorites crash-landed on Ramillies, it was able to activate itself and destroy the planet in mere moments. Fearing the worst, the good people of Gradius aren't sure what to do. Thankfully, the Vic Viper is ready for battle, so it flies into the heart of the enemy's base in an effort to destroy the giant brain that controls the biocomputer. Here's how that goes. Nearly 20 years after first introducing the world to the Vic Viper, Konami has finally given a Gradius game a worthwhile story. Gradius 5 takes place in 8010, a time when the cells from the long-dead Bacterian Empire have had a chance to multiply and have formed a new type of alien being. Dead set on defeating Gradius, the new Bacterian strain attacks the peaceful planet, forcing the Vic Viper to come out of retirement for one final mission. That's a pretty standard Gradius setup, but don't get too comfortable, because out of nowhere, a massive Bacterian warship comes out of a space-time warp in the middle of a battle and attempts a kamikaze attack against Gradius. This is thwarted by the help of a mysterious second Vic Viper, who saves the day and allows our hero to get back to fighting the Bacterian army. Of course, this is not going to be the last time that we see that Vic Viper or even that warship. At the end of the game, we discover the exact same ship, forcing the pilot to realize that the other Vic Viper from the beginning of the game was actually himself from the future. Knowing this, he decides to activate a space-time portal and travels to the past in order to get that much-needed help from the second Vic Viper. This plays out a little bit differently from before, as you'll see from this exciting conclusion. So yeah, there was a lot of repetition about the stories and the endings. Konami sure did like blowing something up at the end and then watching the Vic Viper fly away. It's basically the science fiction equivalent of watching Dracula's castle crumble to the ground in every old school Castlevania game. It's exciting and gets the job done, I suppose, but it's also incredibly repetitive. Thankfully, they ended up changing things up a bit in that final fight. I just wish there was a little bit more of that sprinkled in throughout the rest of the series. Oh well, at least it was fun seeing the explosions improve throughout the years, am I right? Now, if you're wondering what happened to Vic Viper's original pilot, James Burton, then let me just say that it's complicated. James ended up getting into a lengthy feud with Dr. Venom, something that stretched across a number of games in the Nemesis and Salamander spin-offs. This storyline is almost entirely separate from the mainline series, which ends up going thousands of years into the future and doesn't really bother that much with who's flying the Vic Viper. Just about the only connection is the boss at the end of Gradius 5, which claims to be just a small part of what was known as Venom. If that's the case, then who is this Dr. Venom and why is he so important? In order to get to the bottom of this mystery, we're gonna need to dive into the strange and rather convoluted timeline found in the Gradius spin-offs. Don't worry, we'll be back in a future episode to fill in all the details by exploring both the Nemesis and Salamander series. For now, all you need to know is that exactly 1,352 years after the First War, the Bacterian Empire is finally gone for good! Of course, it was almost immediately replaced by the Lars Empire and Gradius Neo, but we'll get to that some other day. Right now is about celebrating the victories and honoring the greatness that is the Vic Viper. Or Warp Rattler, if you prefer. I really don't care what you call it, because peace has finally returned to Gradius. Hell yeah! Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Game Over, the early years. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes almost every week. In fact, there are more than 150 episodes ready to be watched in the playlist right now. Yeah, you should go and check them out. Now, here's the question I have for you. What Gradius game has the best ending? We'll be looking at the spin-offs in another episode, so for now, let's just try and limit the votes to the 7 main series games. I'm actually really excited to see your thoughts in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back tomorrow with a review of Skatebird. Look, I can guarantee that you're gonna want to be here for that. I mean it. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,